Thank you very much, Barbara. Before we have the broader discussion, can I just put to you one issue which I think is very important here? That it is that the board is absolutely determined that it works with CCGs in a way which is supportive. We see this as I think you put it, as co-production, that we work very closely with them to make sure that out of this at the far end comes a universal coverage of CCGs who are as good as they possibly can be, with the insights that we as a board can give them, and which they, through sharing of intelligence and practice, can also achieve. But against that also, we're a regulator. Mm-hmm. We've got the responsibility of ensuring that they are authorised in accordance with the criteria that we prescribe and the processes that we prescribe. And we've got to assure ourselves that through that regulatory process we achieve what we need, which is absolute assurance about safety and the other qualities that you mentioned with effect from 1st of April. How in the processes over the coming months do you see these two in tension, and how do you see that tension being resolved as we go through the authorisation process?
I think it's that what you've described is an ambition which is shared with CCGs. As I go around, I see CCGs around the country wanting to have a mature relationship with the board. They often talk about it not being a parent-child relationship. But actually the majority of them seeing this process as a key and critical step to help them be assured that they've covered all bases, recognising the additional experience of individuals in the board authority and in the future in the board and external stakeholders. So I think it should be possible for us to create a situation whereby there is no compromise at all in terms of ensuring that every CCG across England who is commissioning with effect from the 1st of April has the right circumstances to ensure that they can commission safely, and yet doing that in a way which treats the CCGs as autonomous organisations responsible for their own development and destiny. I think a lot of people in the early stages, when we were talking about authorisation, I think that people kind of saw it as a straightforward pass-fail exercise. And whilst we must be absolutely consistent with our criteria, that actually these are the circumstances which need to be in place in order for us to allow that CCG to commission, I think that we will be in a position to create fairly tailor-made conditions for individual CCGs, such that if there is only one relatively small area of their expertise that we're concerned about, actually the authorisation with conditions addresses that. If it's a very minor concern, then actually that will be addressed in a development plan that would then move into the routine oversight of CCGs that the Operations Directorate would then be doing on a month by month, a week by week, a year by year basis.
So the authorisation process is a gateway. We want to make sure that the CCGs are all established by 1st of April next year, that the majority will be authorised without conditions.
We hope so.
We hope. And some will have conditions attached, but then after April there's an ongoing developing relationship once the CCGs are through the gateway.
And specifically, I think it would be important that we have a clear plan as to how each CCG would reach a point where those conditions were lifted.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Other points?
A couple of points, Chairman, if I may. Firstly, the philosophy of authorisation, that it is really supportive collaboration, I think is really important. The fact you've stressed that, I think, is very helpful. The counterpoint, of course, being that there really are recognised obligations of CCGs in that process, and it brings back the Chairman's point about making sure that the CCGs understand the supportive collaboration, but the obligations on them, and the extent to which there are conditions attached, that there is agreement that those are the conditions, as opposed to a standoff, that there's disagreement on the conditions. Clearly, ultimately, I guess we have to make the case. But I think that's good. I think The second very positive point I would make is the way in which this authorisation guidance has been produced in embracing the stakeholders is very helpful. So this should not come as a surprise, and I think that is positive. And thirdly, the quality of the document itself, I think, is from my perspective as a professional accountant, very comprehensive in terms of its layout. The point you flagged about the next board meeting, though, I do think is important, which is coming back to us with confidence as to the assurance processes and the mechanisms which the board would have. So I welcome that opportunity to have another go at those processes at the May board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Kieran? Yes.
Thought the document was helpful. Agree with Ed that the co-creation process, and I think having patient groups and clinicians and health system managers involved, I think that's a model that we should probably emulate. Just a question on what happens when 220 of these authorisations need to happen. There'll be a lot of people meeting the commissioning board for the first time in a real context. How do we make sure that the tone, to use the word you use, Barbara, comes across in that engagement, that it is seen as being supportive and it's not seen as being an audit? It is about development and moving on and so on as well. So how do we make sure it actually really feels like that on the ground?
I think that for me there are probably two main ways that we can do this. Firstly, the authorisation process is not going on in isolation of the other relationships we have with CCGs. So at the same time, and almost as a mirror image of the authorisation processes, these are all the development interventions. We have a development framework. It's a kind of ongoing document, a development framework for CCGs, whereby we help them, we signpost them to a broad range of development support that they can get in order to help them meet the authorisation. So I think the way that over the next few months individuals both in current SHAs and PCT clusters and in the board authority work with CCGs to demonstrate that we are here to help and that actually this is about supporting them to be as good as they can be will be critically important. I think a second area will be about how we as an organisation, the OD of the organisation, most of the people who are involved in authorising, in the panels and authorising CCGs, many of them will be people who are employed by the board, maybe from a different geographical area than the CCG. There will be others who will be party to the process. There'll obviously be external individuals, including patients' representatives, people from local authorities and other clinical commissioning groups. But I think there is something about how we as a board conduct our business as an organisation and actually ensure that the people working for the board authority, that is the culture, because we as a board of the board will be absolutely dependent on the way that those people out there on the front line work with CCGs. Another area which I think will be very important for us in terms of feedback and understanding of what's going on is we are working with a group of CCG leaders to create something as yet without a name, but which might be a kind of commissioning assembly, but a way that the NHS Commissioning Board and CCG leaders can work together on a range of issues. And I think that the using that forum and the way it has kind of subgroups and groups coming together to look at different aspects, and we could have a small group of CCG leaders specifically coming together to look at that, I think gives us a mechanism of making sure that we remain on track with that ambition. So I think our own culture is key, but I think again as a board we need a range of mechanisms which actually give us the feedback that that's happening.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is in a sense it's one document, but it's a culmination of a lot of work, a lot of time and a lot of effort that's gone into it. And I think certainly talking to CCGs around, you can see how they've felt engaged in all of this. But of course, the key bit is the next bit, isn't it? It's you can have a great thing, but the process can kill it relative, easily. And in the NHS, we've not always done these things in the best way. That's why I think Kieran's point is so important for us. I think as we go through all of this, to ensure that the way it is applied is in the spirit that you've just described. I think that's absolutely the right thing, and I think that will make it more successful. The issue for me is and the risk, and I think we've talked about this before, is the risk is if you drive the process in a particular way, you could try and end up with a whole load of organisations who all look the same, who all kind of look more like PCTs than new clinically led, clinically driven, patient-centred organisations that can make a real difference to patients. And I just wondered whether you want to say anything about that.
I suppose the only thing I could say is that it's no accident that clinically led and clinical focus and adding real voice equality is domain one. And I think that I think it's always been a concern of how do we ensure that we have organisations with enough consistency and enough of the great qualities that PCTs had in terms of being statutory responsible bodies, that we had the confidence that went forward, but actually were different enough in terms of having an absolutely new approach to the kind of clinically led nature, with quality absolutely at the heart of everything that they do and all their resident data, which actually then plays out, I think, through how well they relate to patients and how well they relate to the public. So I think the clinical bit on its own is much less meaningful for us, for me, and I'm sure for the rest of the board. What these organisations have the ability to do is to be much more connected to patients and the public, partly because the people leading them will see patients all day, many days of the week on a regular basis and get that direct feedback, but also because CCGs, the building blocks of CCGs are practices, and actually the vast majority of practices in England nowadays have a patient representative group, which if we can harness that to work, those collectively to work with the CCG should bring that focus. So I think, I think it's a really good challenge. How do we make sure that that's the first thing we always look at and it's key? I think that one way of doing that will be to make sure that we have a broader range of people assessing the CCGs, including other clinical leaders, not only other CCG leaders, but other clinical leaders taking the views of the local clinicians from secondary care, and also making sure that we're taking the views of local authorities, health and wellbeing boards in particular, and local patient groups. And for me, this one, I think the 360-degree view will be absolutely critical. We've already, the tender's been let to actually perform the 360-degree review, and we're clear that will be very extensive. It will include secondary care providers, the full range of clinicians from across the community, local authorities, the constituent practices, and I think we can use that, I think, as one of the mechanisms for ensuring that clinical focus is there. But I think it's kind of relentlessly do things like you've just remind everybody that this is what we're about.